Assassin's Creed 3 is one of the biggest games to hit all major platforms this fall, and the Wii U version is by and large the exact same game, regardless of what that means to you. It has the same beautiful vistas, fluid platforming, and mega violent melee combat. This is also the first time a main Assassin's Creed game has made its way onto a Nintendo platform. If Assassin's Creed 3 is your first, make sure to brush up on its incredibly complex story before diving in. Like the other versions, Assassin's Creed 3 on Wii U also suffers from the occasional technical hiccup, like characters popping in and out of the world out of nowhere, or the artificial intelligence, well, forgetting that it has intelligence. The Wii U specific features are pretty uneven. It's great to play the game using the gamepad screen, but Assassin's Creed 3 looks a little more low-res than some of the sharp displays we saw in Darksiders 2 or Batman Arkham City. On the upside, using the gamepad as a map screen is really helpful. It's like a larger minimap in your hands, telling you where the enemies and objectives are across a large local space. So that covers the Wii U specific features. Despite the new highs and lows, none of this is significant enough to change IGN's mind about the original score of Assassin's Creed 3. So the Wii U score is the same as the 360 and PS3. For everything you need to know about the game, here's our original review.
If there's one image that encapsulates the Assassin's Creed series, it's that of a hooded figure balancing atop some skyscraping parapet looking down into the city below. It's a snapshot that shows off a lot of what makes these games special: their incredible attention to detail, their breathtaking verticality, fascinating architecture, and unique historical settings. But it also represents their limitations. Assassin's Creed games are easy to admire, but you often feel a bit distanced from them too, held back from inhabiting these worlds as fully as you'd like to. Not so with Assassin's Creed 3, which hauls the series across the ocean into a revolutionary American setting that's absolutely bursting with things to do. There's a vast amount of content in this game, from liberating the cities of Boston and New York to building up a homestead to sailing the high seas and just enjoying the outdoors and hunting wildlife. But perhaps because Assassin's Creed 3 is so huge, it can be pretty inconsistent. Sometimes it's spectacular, but it has its dull moments too.
The collectors grow bolder and more forceful. Something we must address, Samuel.
Then let us raise a banner. Something to let the people know that they are not alone.
Assassin's Creed 3 stars hot-tempered Native American Connor and follows pretty much his entire life, from tree-climbing kid to troubled young man to vengeful adult. But without wanting to spoil anything, he's not the only character you'll play. Connor isn't as straightforwardly charming as Assassin's Creed 2's Ezio.
I look forward to enjoying your hospitality.
And although the game is for the most part excellently written, you never warm to the characters in quite the same way.
What would you have me do?
In fact, Assassin's Creed 3 is often at its best outside of the story, when it leaves you to enjoy and inhabit its world. Of course, there's a second side to AC3, the modern-day Desmond bits, which drag you out of the Animus and into the contemporary world. Desmond's chapters in the story are mandatory this time, but they're mercifully brief and rich with optional story detail and conversations. However, the ending of Desmond's story is, to say the least, unsatisfying, and I imagine that many fans will be left wanting. As a technological achievement, Assassin's Creed 3 is astounding. The game's excellent opening in a London opera house is a showcase for the new and improved animation, crowd physics, and freedom of movement, but as soon as you hit the new world, it's all about the great outdoors. Assassin's Creed 3's story spans a period of years, and over that time you get to see forests covered in heavy snow, gleaming in autumnal morning mists and blooming in the summer. It can be stunning. Walking the streets of bustling Boston, full of people and noise and activity, you can't help but be in awe. However, Assassin's Creed 3 is often the victim of its own technological ambition. Pop-in, frame rate drops and occasional graphical glitches are definitely a part of the experience.
Is your reason absconded?
And you do wonder whether the omnipresent fog in New York City has more to do with technical limitations than the weather. The loading times are also pretty hefty. Expect to spend a lot of time looking at this. But it feels petty to begrudge the game for these hiccups when it pushes the boundaries of this generation so far.
No one gets back.
Assassin's Creed 3 turns this fascinating section of history into a vast open-world playground, letting you conquer the rooftops, stalk the forest, and sail the seas of revolutionary America. It's all about enjoying the freedom of movement the game affords you and immersing yourself in its world, as well as setting up impressive set-piece assassinations. Where the storyline missions usually follow a pattern of gathering information, stalking, and eventually killing a high-profile target, outside of that you're free to do whatever you want. Hunt for trinkets, clamber over the rooftops of New York in search of almanac pages, or pick fights with the redcoats on behalf of the populace. Connor's path often intersects with key moments in the American Revolution, putting him in the middle of the Battle of Bunker Hill for one spectacular mission. Freerunning has been simplified and improved in Assassin's Creed 3, and scaling the rock faces and branches of the frontier is no more difficult or confusing than climbing the ornate architecture of European cities. When it works, it looks amazing, and when it doesn't, it makes you look a little bit silly, but it almost always works. Combat is still a fairly simplistic parry and counter system, but it's made much more exciting by some excellently gruesome kill animations and a big selection of weapons. But trying to remain hidden is always more satisfying than just causing a giant brawl. Staying incognito in the assassination missions is extremely challenging, but usually for the right reasons. Assassin's Creed 3 is more combat focused than previous games in the series. There's a lot less leaping around ruined buildings and much more stalking and killing of man and beast both. Within the confines of missions, it can be very prescriptive. Chases are especially rigid, and right at the beginning of Connor's story you're kept on a very short leash for a good 3 hours, which is very frustrating. It's a definite low point that lasts too long, and the game only really recovers when it sets you free again to explore at your own pace. Multiplayer is an unexpected pleasure, placing the finely honed running and killing mechanics of the single player into an inventive and surprisingly cerebral new context. Wolfpack, a score attack mode where you and friends work together to kill NPC targets, is superficially entertaining.
Triple multi-kill.
But it's the familiar Assassinate mode that still holds the most appeal, getting you to identify and kill other human players whilst trying to remain hidden yourself. Assassin's Creed 3 is very enjoyable overall, but its main feeling is that it's not consistently brilliant. There's so much to do outside of the missions that it's overwhelming, and not all of it gels together convincingly. Where some optional stuff like the naval adventures, fort assaults, and homestead story missions are great, other things feel tacked on, unfinished, or queerly pointless, like the Boston and New York underground tunnels, the trading and crafting, and training your own assassins. These features feel like a waste, and the mission's unnecessary prescriptiveness sometimes undermines the sense of freedom that the rest of the game works so hard to create.
The things I do for this place. This must be done properly, else we're no better than those we oppose.
Not everything about Assassin's Creed 3 fits perfectly, but it achieves so much that you can't help but respect it. No other open world game has ever given us a setting that's as impressive to observe or full of things to do as this. Connor's story has its lulls, but it still tells a tale much richer and more compelling than most other games manage, set in a fascinating period of history. Assassin's Creed 3 doesn't knock its predecessors out of the park, but it's up there with the best that this series has ever achieved. For more on Assassin's Creed 3, head over to IGN.